A while ago, we went over the 2.5 calendars that the Aztecs used. There was the Tonalpohualli, used by priests for divination purposes, the Xiuhpohualli used by the general population, and the Venutian Count, which was technically not a calendar, but still. Within the Xiuhpohualli, you'd find the Cempohuallapohualli, which was responsible for keeping track of holidays, festivals, and ritualistic sacrifices. If you remember in the previous video, I didn't really have time to go over each month, but this is a new video, so I do now. So let's get started. Oh, by the way, I will be using the Spanish word veintena, because it literally means 20 days. And last but not least, we cannot talk about Aztec rituals and ceremonies without getting into human sacrifices, so be ready for that. Called either Atlacahualo or Cuauhitlewa, the names could be summarized as when the waters stop and the trees rise. This month, or veintena, was dedicated to Tlaloc, the god of rain, lightning, caves, and springs. It was also dedicated to the Tlaloques, or the assistants of Tlaloc. They carried bases full of water throughout the sky, and according to legend, we get thunder and rain whenever they break one of the bases. Rituals for this veintena included the sacrificing of 7 children, who were either slaves or were the second sons of nobles. They would be well dressed and adorned like Tlaloc, and transported on stretchers surrounded by priests and dancers to a sacred mountain. If the children cried on the way, it was considered to be a good thing, because this meant that Tlaloc would bless the land with plenty of rain. Called Tlacaxipehualitzli, or the Flaying of Man, this month was dedicated to Xiuhpetotec, the god of life, death, rebirth, agriculture, and sickness. During this veintena, prisoners of war were sacrificed and skinned. Priests of Xiuhpetotec would wear these human skins to take the appearance of the god himself. They would go house to house, offering blessings and cures for sickness, in exchange of food and other trinkets, all on behalf of the god himself. It was called Tzotztontli, or Little Vigil. This veintena was dedicated to Coatlicue, goddess of fertility, life, and death. People held a vigil on cornfields from sundown to midnight for a good harvest. There was dancing, offerings, and bird sacrifices. Called Hueyitozotzli, or the Great Vigil, all rites were dedicated to Sinteolt, god of maize and subsistence. It was also dedicated to his female version, and in some retellings, also his wife, Xicomecoatl, the goddess of agriculture. Men and women went down to the cornfields to gather young corn stalks and ears. These corn plants were decorated with flowers and had food offered to them. Up next is Toscalt, or dryness. This veintena paid tribute to Tezcatlipoca and Huitzilopochtli. People created garlands of roasted corn and placed them on statues of these deities. Amaranth grain, called uautli in Nahuatl, was mixed with honey to make giant idols of Huitzilopochtli. People took these idols and placed them on altars and offered gifts to them. Then, Mexican nobility held a great party next to the Templo Mayor. The ceremony ended by cutting up the edible statues and distributing it among the people to eat. Next is Etzalcoalitzli, or Estalis eaten. By the way, Estali was a stew consisting of corn and beans. This month was dedicated to Tlaloc, as this was the last month before the rain season. Priests would beg Tlaloc one last time for plenty of rain, and it was done by, you guessed it, human sacrifices. Except this time, both adults and children were taken to Mount Tlaloc and sacrificed. Next is the Quihuitontli, or the small feast for the revered ones. Despite the name implying that it's plural, This Veintena was mostly dedicated to Xiuhpohualli, goddess of salt and salted waters. During the festival thrown in her honor, one woman, a daughter or family member of a salt maker, would be chosen to be with Xiuhpohualli herself. Once she was dressed and decorated just like her, this deity in the flesh would be honored with food and dances for 10 days. Then she was sacrificed via beheading. The festivities, the banquets, and the drinking would continue on until sundown. This one was called Way de Quiwilt, or the Greater Feast for the Revered Ones. This Veintena paid tribute to all deities as a thanks for a good harvest, but especially to Xilonen, goddess of ripe corn, and who may or may not be known as Xiuhpohualli. Another deity venerated this month was Xochipilli, god of flowers, games, art, and beauty. A couple of slaves were dressed up and decorated like the two deities, and, of course, sacrificed. The next Veintena is Tlaxochimaco, or Mikkawitontli. The first means offering of flowers, and the second, small feast for the dead. 3 gods were paid tribute during this Veintena, and it was done with flowers. Bouquets of flowers were offered to temples and altars, first to Xiuhpohualli, then to Tezcatlipoca, and finally to Mixtlantecutli, god of the underworld and keeper of the dead. This Veintena had 2 names, Xocolhuetzi, meaning falling fruit, and Way Mikaiwil, meaning great feast for the dead. A lot of things happened this month, so bear with me. First, everyone fasted for 3 days to honor the dead. Once the fasting was over, everyone would climb to the roof of their houses and call out the names of their dead loved ones, inviting them to join the festival. Meanwhile, a tree trunk called the xocoatl was decorated with bright paper. It was placed on the great temple and stood upright, held up by ropes. On the 19th, a figurine made out of amaranth dough was placed on top of the tree trunk, but they didn't do anything with it just yet, because the next day, war prisoners who were meant to represent the Mimishkoa were sacrificed via bonfire. It was only then that people would compete to try and reach the figurine on top of the tree trunk. If successful, the figurine was cut and shared with everyone. And finally, to finish up the festival, the tree trunk known as the xocoatl was knocked over. Up next is Oxpanitzli, also known as sweeping. This Veintena was mostly dedicated to the goddess Tosi, the mother of the gods, goddess of purification, and heart of the earth. A deep silence took over the city for the first 5 days. Then, in the next 6 to 8 days, warriors marched with bouquets of flowers called Cempohuallapohualli until the sun dropped. Meanwhile, on the 8th day, female healers and midwives had mock battles with each other in the streets. They used the flowers and twigs left behind by the soldiers as swords. Afterwards, they swept the streets, getting them ready for the arrival of the goddess Tosi, who was actually a 40-year-old woman chosen to be sacrificed. Because Tosi was the goddess of purity, the chosen woman was kept in a cage, guarded by women, for 20 days, so she would not run away and be intimate with a man. She was also not allowed to cry or frown, so the female guards played games to entertain her. If this didn't work, she was beaten. It was believed that if the lady portraying Tosi cried, each tear spilled would bring upon the birth of a stillborn or the death of a warrior. After her sacrifice, this festival ended with the cleaning of all statues, temples, and buildings. The 12th Veintena was Teotleco, or the arrival of the gods. This Veintena consisted in waiting for the gods to arrive to earth, beginning with Tezcatlipoca and ending with Huehueteotl, the old god. Their arrival was celebrated with the sacrifices of prisoners of war. Up next is Tepeiwilt, or the Feast for the Mountains. I think this one is my favorite holiday so far, as this was essentially the first cake-cutting party in the New World. Because this Veintena was dedicated to Tlaloc and the Tlaloques, yes again, the women prepared a large cake made out of the same amaranth and honey dough. It was in the shape of the mountains surrounding the area, and it was decorated with small figurines of snakes, bones, and other aquatic creatures. Oh, and of course, there were clay figurines of Tlaloc present as well. Friends and family gathered together and had a large feast. Then, the amaranth cake was cut, symbolizing the sacrifice of the mountains. And of course, a piece was given to each guest to eat. Up next is Xiuhpohualli, or war spear. It was dedicated to Xiuhpohualli, god of the hunt, war, and stars. There were two parts to this festival. The first part was called Tlacoquicholi, meaning half of Xiuhpohualli. It consisted in people making arrows and spears in Xiuhpohualli's temple. The second part was called Xiuhpohualli, or the end of Xiuhpohualli. It consisted in honoring fallen warriors. They did so by burning bundles of arrows, hummingbird feathers, and heron feathers. Afterwards, a great hunt took place, and all the animals captured were sacrificed. Next is Panquetzalitzli, or the raising of banners. This one was dedicated to the most important god, Xiuhpohualli. He was celebrated with songs and dances. The masters of the prisoners who would be sacrificed would fast out of respect. Then, at the end of the month, a game of tlachtli would be played. A figure of Xiuhpohualli was once again created out of huatli, or amaranth grains and honey, and split among the population to eat. Now we have Atemotzli, or the descent of water. We are now in the dry season, which means that of course it was dedicated to Tlaloc. He was celebrated a little differently this time. Amaranth idols were made of him, but because Tlaloc was always depicted with bulging eyes and pointed teeth, the edible statues had pumpkin seeds as teeth and beans for eyes. Also, a seed was buried in the chest to represent the heart. A priest would cut the heart out of each statue. These seeds would become an offering for the water gods. And of course, the statues were eaten afterwards. Next is Titild, which can either be growth or shrinkage. And you might be thinking, what's with the contradiction? Growth refers to the Titild constellation, which apparently showed up in the night sky during this time. So what does it have to do with growth? Well, nothing really. The constellation is of two boys pulling at each other's arms, so I guess they're getting taller. Meanwhile, shrinkage refers to Ilamatecutli, or the old woman, who is the main deity venerated this month. Titil is a month of games and food. For the former, small pillows were stuffed with feathers, flowers, or shreds of paper, and were given to all the boys and men. Then, they had pillow fights. Yes, you heard me right. They eventually involved all the girls and women by attacking them, who retaliated by stealing their pillows and hitting them back. This pillow fight was an allegory of Xiuhpohualli's conception. His mother was impregnated with a ball of feathers that fell and touched her belly. As for the food served, first there was a special sour bread called xocotamalli, prepared with black corn dough. There was also a sour drink called xocoatolli, also prepared with black corn. Both of these things are part of Mexican cuisine to this day, with just a few changes. The final Veintena is Ixcalli, or rebirth. It is dedicated to Xiuhpohualli, god of fire and warmth. At this time, Xiuhpohualli would be represented as a young man, but as the months progressed, he would be depicted as a wrinkled old man. On the 10th day of Ixcalli, all male youth went hunting for small water creatures like snakes, frogs, and axolots, and gave them to priests, who acted like guardians for Xiuhpohualli. In exchange, the boys would receive a dish that would resemble tamales. On the 16th day, the fire in Xiuhpohualli's temple would be put out, and a new one was lit in front of the newly adorned deity. Finally, the hearts of sacrificed victims will be cooked on coal and will be given to the god as an offering. Congratulations! You have made it past the Cempohuallapohualli. However, if you remember from a previous video, you'd know that after the Cempohuallapohualli, we have the Nemontemi, or the 5 days called those that complete in vain, or just simply the empty ones. It was once thought that these 5 days were considered unlucky because, unlike other days, they were not overseen by a deity, a sign, or a cardinal point. Hence the name the empty ones. However, while there is some truth to that, now we know that these days were about reflection. The average person was to stay home, be with family, and meditate about what took place in the past year, and be conscious about what will take place in the next. Because the Nemontemi had no protection from any deity, a baby's birth during this time was inconvenient. Thus, priests performed endless rituals to protect the little one. For that same reason, important activities were avoided because if they went wrong, there would be no gods to ask for help. And well, after the 5th day, it was finally over. A new year would begin, and the cycle would repeat. Unless it was one of those years. You know, when they celebrated the new fire ceremony. Oh, but that's a video for another time. This has gone for far too long, so as always, thank you for watching till the end, and have a pleasant evening.